The Dillon RL-550 is a legendary 4-station progressive reloading press. Gavin Gear here from UltimateReloader.com. What I've got here is the very latest edition of this press, the RL-550C. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to unbox this press, we're going to get it set up, we're going to load some pistol ammo, I think we'll load some 9mm, we're going to load some rifle ammo showing the primer size changeover. I'm thinking some 6mm Creedmoor because I've got an upcoming match that I'm loading ammo for. And there's also just a little bit of a twist. You're going to have to watch the rest of the video to hear all about that. So let's get this box open and see exactly what's included with the RL-550C. Dillon is known for really good packaging. I'm guessing they don't have a lot of shipping damage returns because you'll find these molded foam inserts. Check that out. Check out how nice that is. All right, so we've got some instruction manual materials. We've got the handle. We've got priming, low primer sensor, primer pickup tubes and return rod, hardware for the handle. Okay, so that is everything that is in this top foam insert. I'm gonna go ahead and set that aside. Let me tilt this so that you all can see what's inside the box here. Do you see that? Okay, so we've got the press frame assembly. Oh yeah, gotta love that Dillon blue. We've got powder measure assembly, and we've got a box of parts. All right, double checking. Looks like we've got everything there. Oh, this is a good moment. You just gotta love it when you see a brand new press come out of the packaging. Look at that, a brand new press to replace my very well patinaed and aged RL-550 original edition. You're going to want to check out those videos on the channel if you haven't already. Wow, that's a beauty. Look at that. I'm loving it. We've got a rubber band holding the pins for the tool head there. Get that off. Okay, now let's open this accessories parts box. Completed cartridge bin. We've got priming system parts. Let's get those out of the bag. So we've got one primer slider installed, and we've got another primer slider that covers large and small, some Allen keys, indexing parts. With this press, it's add the shell plate and pins. There's caliber changeover kit, and you're going to also want an additional tool head for additional calibers that you buy parts for. Okay. The discharge chute. Okay. I'm going to get this stuff organized. I'm going to get the press mounted on an inline fabrication quick change plate. I will note that Dillon also fabricates their own strong mount, which is also very good. I use the inline fabrication mount system here in the shop. So I'm going to get that set up. I'm going to get everything all organized so that we can see everything that was included here, and we'll get this press set up for some 9mm. Okay, real quick before I get this press mounted, I just wanted to walk through all of the box contents now that I've got everything laid out neat and tidy. Okay, we've got the instruction materials, we've got the low primer warning system, the press handle, washer, and nut. We've got all of the priming system parts and pieces, including some extra bits that we need to pick up large and small primers and that we need to prime large and small primers on the press. We've got a complete powder measure with a small bar installed. We've also got the large bar. So this means that we can dispense powder charges for pistol and rifle with what we've got with the kit here. We've got the safety return rod. We'll see that in a moment. A complete set of Allen keys, 3 die lock rings, the pieces that we're going to need for indexing when we install the shell plate. We've got the discharge chute, the spent primer collector, and the completed cartridge bin. Now let's get this press mounted and start to put it together. So the press is now mounted to the inline fabrication quick change top plate. That means that we can click this into position at will. This is a slightly modified version of the inline fabrication top plate with side bin system. I attached another piece of angle iron over here. It's just a simple matter of getting the 4 bolts fed through, tightening everything down, and then there's an aftermarket discharge chute that's meant to work with this system that attaches to the side. Next, what I want to do is guide you through the process of putting this press together as outlined in the quick start guide. Let's do it. The assembly of the press starts with the handle. The handle just drops down through a hole in the linkage. You've got a washer on the top and a nut on the bottom. There is a through hole. You can put a screwdriver through this hole or an Allen key through the hole so that the handle doesn't rotate while you're tightening that lock nut. Then you're going to drop the primer catcher onto a little saddle on the right hand press linkage. It's going to fit right there in place and collect all of the spent primers as depriming happens. Then you're going to take the primer operation rod and insert it into the primer tube block here at the top. Raise the ram to the top of its stroke by lowering the handle, and then feed the other end on the other side of the pulley. You just have to push forward a little bit, pop it behind, and then operate the press a couple times to make sure that it's operating correctly. Now we're ready to get into some of the caliber specific parts. Now the press comes with 1 tool head, but you're going to have to add to that a conversion kit and a set of dies to get completely set up. Each time you get another conversion kit, you should also order another tool head if you want to leave things set up, and you probably do. So next, we're going to walk through the process of getting all of the related parts attached to the press so that we can start to set up our dies. For the caliber specific parts, we're going to attack the shell plate area first. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the detent ball and the detent spring and drop it into the appropriate hole in the subplate. We can then slide the shell plate into place, put the indexing star on top of that, and then insert the hold down bolt through the indexing star and through the shell plate into the subplate and get it finger tight. Now we're going to want to take the set screw that comes in from the side on the ram and get that in place with just a little bit of tension. Here comes the important part. We want to make sure that the hold down bolt has enough tension to prevent the shell plate from flopping around, but it has enough slop so that we can freely index the shell plate. You're going to want to experiment with this a little bit to get the feel just right. Now it's time to install the powder measure on the press. We're going to start by loosening the 2 clamp bolts that secure the powder measure to the powder die. We can now drop in the appropriate powder funnel from our caliber conversion kit. For pistol calibers like what we're using here, that's also going to include an expanding function. For rifle calibers, it's just a straight up drop tube. Now we install a tool head in the press, drop the pins in place, and we can tighten that powder die down about halfway. Now it's time to drop on the powder measure onto the powder die and finger tighten those 2 clamp bolts that we removed previously. We want the powder measure to be able to rotate slightly. Now we can take the fail-safe rod, insert it into the linkage plates at the top and through the bracket at the bottom, test cycle a couple times, and add tension to the return rod so that we get a little bit of spring compression at the bottom of the stroke each time. Next, we're going to install the low primer alarm. It's as simple as installing the included AAA battery, closing the battery door, and then pulling the entire assembly down over the knurled cap on the top of the primer tube. Now when we get close to running out of primers, we're going to get an audible alarm, and that's great. Setting up the dies on the 550 is really straightforward. We've got a Dillon 3-die set with a carbide sizer deprimer. That sizer deprimer is going to screw into station number 1. We're going to raise the shell plate to the top of the stroke, screw that die in until it contacts the shell plate, tighten the lock ring. In station number 2, we're going to come back to that powder die setup. We're going to raise and lower the powder die in the tool head to either apply more case mouth expansion or less. What we want is just a little bit, just enough so that the bullet sits evenly in the case mouth. That's going to be about 5 to 10 thousandths. When you're satisfied with that setting, tighten down the lock ring and retighten the clamp screws. Should be ready to go in station number 2. Station number 3 is our bullet seating. I took the die apart real quick to flip the seating stem from the round nose profile to the flat point profile because I've got Hornady 124 grain XTP bullets we're seating here. That's going to work really good for this particular bullet. I took a dummy cartridge, put it into station number 3, raised the ram to the top of the stroke. Now we can lower that seating die until we feel it contact the bullet, and then just a little bit more to account for compression of everything. Tighten the lock ring, seat a dummy round with the actual bullet we're going to seat, confirm the cartridge overall length. I was going for about 1.060 inches. I think I had 1.058 and a half. Very close, plenty good for this particular load. Finally, in station number 4, we're going to do the crimp. That's just going to remove that expansion that we did in station number 2 with the powder through expander, and we can again use a dummy cartridge for that. Put it in station number 4, raise the ram to the top of the stroke, screw the die down until we feel it contact, and then about a half turn more or less. We're going to confirm that when we get all done. Now we can load components, and then it's going to be time to run around through the press to confirm all of our setup for each station. So now we've loaded components, we've loaded our primers and our powder. I just confirmed my powder charge on a digital scale. I want 5 grains of CFE pistol. That's the powder we're using. We're using Hornady 124 grain XTP bullets, and we're using brand new Starline brass. This is some good stuff. So now what it's time to do is to run a case all the way through and create our first cartridge, and we'll just confirm that everything is good to go there. So we're gonna each time manually index, sized in the first stage and primed. Now we've got a powder charge. We're gonna place a bullet in station number 3. It fits nicely. And then we're gonna crimp. Okay, now we need to check our results. I've got a Wilson Tools and Gauges, Ellie Wilson 9mm case gauge. We're just gonna drop that in. Sits nice and flush on top. We know we're sized adequately. So now we're ready to get down to business and do full progressive loading. When we're loading progressively, we're in continuous mode. That means 4 operations are happening simultaneously, and every time we index the shell plate, a completed cartridge will go down into the completed cartridge bin, and we're going to insert a new piece of brass. So each time I place a bullet, I'm doing a very diligent powder check at station number 3. Prime on the forward stroke, insert a case. Top off a bullet, I'm doing again my visual on my powder charge. Forward to prime. After a bit, you're going to get into a rhythm with this progressive loading, and you can see how quickly it can go. Now, before we get too far along here, I think it's really important that we function check some of this ammo, don't you think? So I'm going to run the press down here. I think we need to hit the range real quick. Awesome. So I loaded up a magazine for my Canik TP9 SFX. This is the fun part. I'd say we're running pretty good. When I was done loading 9mm Parabellum, it was time to switch over to 6mm Creedmoor. This is a good exercise because it's kind of a worst case scenario. In that, we're going to need to switch out the primer size on the primer slider. We're going to need to change from pistol charge bar to the rifle charge bar on the powder measure, change our shell plate, and change dies. So it involves all of the different components of switching calibers. In many cases, it's going to be a lot quicker and easier than this, but this will demonstrate all of those different steps. The first thing I did was to dump the powder measure. And there's two quick ways to do that. One is you can loosen the clamp screws and take the return bar off, slide the entire powder measure off the powder die, and dump it. I did that because I knew I would need to disassemble the powder measure to switch from the small charge bar to the large charge bar. But if you're leaving your tool head set up, you can just remove the return rod, pull your pins, and then take the entire tool head out, invert the entire thing to dump your powder into the canister. And that's really the optimal way to get set up for different calibers if you're switching over frequently, is to have dedicated tool heads and a dedicated powder measure for each of those setups. That way it's a really quick and simple matter to get it slid in, get everything dialed in and confirmed, and you're off and running. I had to change the powder bar over. I did that following the dumping of the powder, and it's a simple matter of loosening the screw that clamps these plates in place, and then pulling. There's a little square nylon block. If you pull that back just a little bit, the whole primer slider bar will slide right out, and then you slide the new one in place. I'm going from pistol, which is small here, to rifle, which is large here. Retighten this Allen screw here, being careful not to over tighten it. Leave it just a little bit of slop so the plates aren't bound up when the powder measure is operating. Then it was time to switch over the shell plate and related components. There's brass locator pins here that are at 3 of the stations, and those just keep the case rim held in place when you're indexing from one station to another. And so I pulled those. I pulled the set screw and then pulled the hold down bolt. The star and the shell plate comes off. The next shell plate goes on. The star goes back on top of that. Then the hold down bolt. Then the set screw. Then that tension adjustment, where again, you want enough slop for this indexing to happen freely, but not so much slop that things have too much play in them in terms of the precision of the loading process that's going on. That takes care of the shell plate area. Then it's time to take a look at the priming system. And this is a really quick changeover. You're going to remove the operating rod, detach the return spring. There's 2 Allen screws here on the bottom that you're going to pull out, and then the entire assembly will lift off of the press frame. You can then swap out the primer slider for the other size that you're switching to, and then in your column here, you're going to want to take the knurled cap off the top and remove the tube and switch to the tube that you're switching to. In this case, it was from small to large, since I'm loading large rifle primer 6mm Creedmoor. There's one important step that you need to pay careful attention to with the 550, and that's when you set this assembly back down, you're going to need to align the primer slider at the forwardmost part of its travel with the subplate. And what you can do is just wiggle it a little bit, and then as you're pushing down gently, you'll see the priming cup come up through the subplate. That's the alignment that you're going to want to pay careful attention to. Put your return spring on and get your Allen screws up in, and then carefully wiggle the back of the primer slider to make sure that it's perfectly centered, that priming cup on the front of the slider with the subplate. Then tighten those Allen screws down. Everything's going to stay in perfect alignment. Return the operating rod into its proper position with the pulley captive behind it. Cycle the press a couple times to verify that everything is going to work, and then load your components. I loaded CCI BR2 primers here. I have H4350 powder. I'm using Berger 105 grain hybrid target bullets, and Starline large rifle primer 6mm Creedmoor, brand new brass. So that's the basic loading setup. Let me next talk about the different die station utilizations that I've got going on here and how we set up the dies. Okay, so here we've got an RCBS full-length sizer die for 6mm Creedmoor in station number 1. And what I did was I set the height so that I could feel the expander ball go through the case neck and out the other side into the interior. And that was it. I stopped there, so this die is way higher than it would normally be for full-length sizing. That's because we're using new brass, and all we really want to do here is expand the case mouth and the neck and make sure that it's completely uniform. So moving over to station number 2, this setup is just a matter of when there's a case in station number 2 and the ram is at the top of the stroke, making sure that the linkage is fully to the extent of its range of motion so that the powder bar is fully extended. This is super critical for getting very consistent powder charges. Station number 3, I've got a Hornady powder cop die. At the top of the stroke, we can see that little white O-ring come to the top. That's going to give me the ability to check every single loaded round to make sure that the powder charge is in the right proximity. Station number 4, we've got an RCBS 6mm Creedmoor standard bullet seating die. And what I did here was I raised the ram to the top of the stroke with a piece of brass in place. I lowered the die until I could feel it contact the body. Now this was actually a loaded cartridge that had loaded previously, and it had the bullet seated to just the correct depth. So I had backed off the seating plug. At this point, now that the die body is set and I've locked the lock ring, we adjust the seating stem until we can feel it contact, lower the ram a little bit, give it about 1/8 of a turn more, lock it down. Now we're probably within about 5/1000ths and can adjust our bullet seating depth accordingly. So that's an overview of the die setup. Now let's load some ammo progressively. I didn't show running up the press for 9mm, so we'll do that here. Each time we're going to insert a case into station number 1, get the process going here. And again, at the forward stroke, I'm going to very deliberately prime. The 550 likes for you to back it off just a little bit when you spin. I've noticed that makes it work just a little bit smoother. Just going to continue this process each time. Now, when we get to station number 3, when there's a case there, at the top of the stroke, we're going to check our powder charge. Looks good. And I'm going to let things set at the top because it takes a while for the powder to fall. I know that seems funny, but with rifle, there's a lot of powder going through a small orifice there. Now all the stations are full. So now we're going to put a bullet in station number 4, and then at the top of the stroke, we're going to check our powder level. Same procedure each time. You'll notice this goes really fast compared to single stage loading. And when I've got, say, 600 rounds of practice ammo to load, that makes a big, big difference. I've noticed the donut, the height of the donut there, the little O-ring, it does change even if you've got a consistent powder charge, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The important thing is that you get a visual that you've got roughly the right amount of powder. I am liking this. You can index this press faster, but I like to just take it slow so that I don't spill powder, and that's really more of a concern with something like 45 ACP, where you've got a high powder level and a short, fat case. It likes to spin, and that's one of the nice things about a manually indexing press, is that you can index it at whatever speed you want. There's no mechanical limitations. You can get that rhythm just perfect. And when we're done, we can run the press down. So in a relatively short period of time, we've been able to crank out a nice pile of 6mm Creedmoor ammunition. But if we go back to the very beginning of the video, you might recall me saying there was a little bit of a twist to this story. Most people are familiar with the RL-550B or the RL-550C as a good all-around handgun or all-around rifle press. What a lot of people don't realize is the kind of quality match grade ammunition. Of course, it depends on what your definition of match grade is. You're probably not going to load bench rest ammo on a progressive. But that match grade ammunition can be loaded on this press. And in fact, my former friend, shooting mentor, and local shooting sports legend, Jim Finlay, who passed recently, loaded all of his PRS ammunition on Dillon 550s. And I want to break down a few ways that that's possible. First, with the powder charge, if you do your load development, I just published a video on this, you'll be able to find a velocity node where you can have a little bit of a fluctuation in powder charge weight and not have a huge effect on velocity. I was able to use a manual thrower and get sub 10 SD on my velocity, which is exactly what I need for this particular match. I verified this powder measure. It's also running at about plus or minus 0.1 grains with the Hodgdon H4350 powder that I'm using there. Check. Also, this press has a small diameter shell plate, and that means that there's less of a tendency for tipping if you have an imbalance in force. Say you're running the press up or running it down, or you have different things that are going on that are a part of the reloading process. But you can also mitigate the bulk of those force fluctuations if you don't full-length size on the progressive press. I'm using new brass, so I'm just punching the expander ball through the case neck to open that up a little bit and uniform it. If I've got previously fired brass, I can always size that on a single stage, tumble off the lube, and then pull it into this process as I've shown here. So if you're not full-length sizing on the press, you get much more consistency in things like bullet seating depth. Let me show you that. Here I've got a bullet comparator tool that's going to allow us to check the base to ogive for a few of the cartridges that we've loaded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my cartridge just a little bit to get things set here, settled in, and I'm going to zero that. And let's double check that if we resettle things here. Okay, so that's good. Let's check a couple more to see what kind of consistency we're getting here. Okay, so that's within 1/1000 of an inch. I find it helps to spin just a little bit. That's within 1/1000 of an inch. You see where this is going? This is the way to do it. Again, well, the last few have all been the same. So extremely good consistency, and I attribute that to the fact that I'm not full-length sizing on the press, and this is a great stable platform for this kind of precision. Now you see why I like this press for match ammunition. Before we conclude, let's run through some quick pros and cons. Pros for the 550B: versatility and flexibility. You can load regular ammo, you can load match ammunition. Cost is a pro. Quality is a pro. You're getting great quality. Dillon is known for that. You're getting the no BS warranty, and it's coming at a price that's really affordable. Not just for the press, but these caliber conversion kits are very simple due to the simple nature of this press setup, and that just means you have to pay less for each additional caliber that you add. Dillon is also known for all of their accessories, tools. You can configure this thing however you want. It's going to be a good investment. It's got good resale value. On the con side, anytime that you're limited to 4 stations, you're going to have to make some compromises when you get into more complicated reloading setups. For instance, if you wanted to check your powder charge and you wanted separate bullet seating and bullet crimping, you can't do that with this particular press. Is that an issue? Well, it kind of depends on what your requirements are and what you're trying to accomplish. 4 stations is definitely adequate for most reloading scenarios, but if you want more stations, you might want to look at a press that has more, like the XL-750 or the 1050, and so on and so forth. It doesn't have the auto indexing either, which again is both a pro and a con. You can control it precisely. You don't have to worry about spilled powder because you can control that. At the same time, there's a little bit of a cost for safety. If you do double charge, that can be an issue. All you need to keep in mind is that you need to be really diligent and get into a rhythm and never make exceptions. If you ever have a problem with your progressive press, don't continue. Check every station, remove every cartridge if you need to. Better safe than sorry in all cases. I absolutely love this press. I'm going to be loading some match ammunition in the next coming weeks with it, so I'm really glad that I got it set up here. I would like to know what you think. What do you think of the 550? Are you running 1 of these, 2 of these, 4 of these? Please drop a comment and share your feedback on this particular press. Let's start a discussion. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget, I got a full article if you click on that first link in the video description that's going to have more detail, more feeds and speeds, links to product pages, and so on and so forth. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, I've got Ultimate Reloader shirts at the Ultimate Reloader store. I'm on Patreon. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications because I got a lot more Dillon content coming up. Until next time, happy shooting and happy reloading.